de la tarde. No sin antes recordarles, como habíamos dicho desde la mañana, que íbamos a compartir unos libros con ustedes. Creo que hay un poco de gente que se nos quedó afuera, entonces daremos el sorteo con las personas que están acá. Les voy a molestar que se levanten de su asiento, levanten el asiento y vean hacia debajo, tienen un papelito con un nombre de un libro.
Esa era mi silla, sigamos, ¿no? Esa era mi silla.
Bueno, les recuerdo nuevamente la exposición fotográfica que se inaugurará a continuación de la última charla y de la plenaria que tengamos hoy. Les recuerdo que también en la inauguración tendremos más libros, así que por favor acompáñennos. Continuando con el evento, vamos a dar la bienvenida a la doctora Asilis Barnesante, quien obtuvo su maestría en Ciencias de la Conservación de Monumentos y Sitios en 2012 en el Centro Internacional PRECOMOS para la Conservación de la Universidad Católica de Lovaina de Bélgica. Durante sus estudios avanzados realizó una pasantía en la oficina de la UNESCO en Amán, Jordania, donde ayudó en el trabajo de campo para el desarrollo de una metodología de evaluación de riesgos. En 2017, tras 4 años de investigación, obtuvo el título de doctora en Ingeniería con el tema relacionado a estrategias de conservación preventiva del patrimonio construido orientadas a la gestión sostenible y el desarrollo local. Complementariamente, participó en el proyecto Patrimonio Cultural para Europa, financiado por el programa Cultura de la Unión Europea. Bienvenida.
Everyone can understand. First, a little my Spanish is not sufficient in Spanish. I'm very sorry. Do we need translator? I will speak slow and something like that. And if there is a problem with understanding, raise your hand. Okay, so my name is okay, so my name is I'm from the I will not talk about transformations, but about transitions, which is a common term in evolutionary economics. So here we go. Yeah, I wanted to say something about my background, but I think you already know by now from the CV, so I will continue. The talk that I will give today is directly related to two of the most challenging changes that our society is facing today. On the one hand, we have climate change, and on the other hand, we have the general economic crisis, let's say. We can see that both on an international level and on a European level, there is a growing list of actions, policy documents, and researches going on that are telling us to find more sustainable ways to manage and deal with our existing building stock, and also the role that built heritage can play in this process. What is important to note is that many of these processes in the past, they have always focused on very curative approaches, as was said already this morning. So then we are talking about big restorations with a lot of funds, but increasingly we can find research and evidence that tells us that preventive approaches are a much more effective approach in terms of site management and in terms of maintaining historical authenticity and physical integrity of buildings. And as a plus, it's also a much more cost-effective approach for built heritage owners and managers. So the question arises then, we know from evidence, from research, that preventive approaches are much more effective for managing our heritage, but why are we not implementing it? We even have evidence that preventive conservation is a good method also in relation to sustainable development, but we are not implementing it. So the general question that I will, or the central question that I will try to answer with this presentation is, what changes do we have to implement in the existing way of managing built heritage to actually operationalize a more preventive approach? Before I do this, I would like to tell you very shortly something about how we understand preventive conservation and how we understand the role of built heritage in the sustainable development process. We've heard already many people today talk about sustainable development and its relation to built heritage. And as was correctly mentioned in the abstract of this specific session, a lot of research has been done. So I think it's only fair that I give a short perspective on where I position myself in this debate. For me, it's an interrelation. So if you look a bit deeper into research and practices, you will find a lot of things dealing with the impact of built heritage on sustainable development, or let's say the consequences of let's say climate change on built heritage. But here we are really looking into the interrelation of impacts, and this is the scheme that I want to present. The interrelation for me is based on four main points. The first one is quality protection, innovative economic processes, public participation, and skill building. Let's go a bit deeper into the four topics. The first one is quality protection. The example here is a small intervention with cement-based mortars on historical mortars. Due to a lack of compatibility between the materials, there is damage to both the historical mortar as well as the bricks. What does this case learn us? That you can avoid damage by having a good quality of intervention, by having people working on the buildings who know what they are doing, and by these methods you can save money of consequential damages, so it also turns into resource efficiency. Now, to operationalize this, of course you need good people with good knowledge. This goes both for, let's say, craftsmen, but also for professionals working in the field. So this can go from architects to engineers to historians. We need people with good knowledge. And then the third pillar is innovative economic processes. I will try to explain this very easily by a short example of one of our colleagues in Slovakia. The picture you see here is from an organization called PRECOMOS, which is basically the Monuments Watch organization that's in Slovakia. And they had a very interesting project where the Ministry of Labor actually started the project. And they started it because in the mountain areas of Slovakia, there is a lot of castles and manor houses who are in a very bad state of conservation. Now, Slovakia is a poor country, so they don't have resources to implement interventions or to make restorations. At the same time, the Ministry of Labor saw that there's a lot of unemployment in the country. So they started a project whereby they were training unemployed people or unemployed construction workers in specific crafts to restore these buildings in rural areas. The nice thing about the project is that in the process of doing this, the different historic houses or castles were restored. A younger generation of craftsmen or construction workers were trained in working with crafts ranging from masonry to carpentry, and all of this was achieved by using resources that are not meant for heritage, but that were implemented for heritage. And then the final one is something that we have been discussing several times today, is public participation. I refer here to, on the one hand, trying to involve the larger community, as well as making aware the owners of built heritage about the importance of doing maintenance and doing the upkeep of their building. This being said, we want to know how we can implement these four cornerstones, and for that I will talk about innovations. This was, let's say, the major part of my own research. So when we talk about innovations, let's start by giving a definition. In the context of, among others, organizational management, and innovation is, in essence, implementing a new idea that results in an improvement. I think that's very basic and very easy to understand. The second point is that innovation will always rise from intersecting different disciplines and ideas. So it's a co-creation. This is often referred to as the Medici effect. And then the third point, this is very important, you will see it also later on, is that an innovation can only come about if the society needs the innovation, if they want innovation. And then finally, the space where you can really see or feel innovations are markets, which is pretty logical. The idea of innovations has been a fascination to multiple people over time, policymakers, researchers, big businesses who want to know if they should invest in something or not. As a consequence, a lot of research has happened on this. A very common way to deal with innovations is in the fields of microeconomics. What do the microeconomists do? They look for innovation opportunities in terms of very small market activities. So I put two examples here. For instance, if you see the growth for a specific product growing, you could invest in it and create an increase. This is microeconomics. But for us, here in the built heritage field, this logic, it doesn't work. Why? Because we are dealing with values and buildings that are very difficult to just quantify. You have cultural values and you cannot put it just in. So we have to look for a different method to deal with innovation. So after reviewing different schools of economic thoughts, we found that the best way to deal with it is the economics of socio-technical change in the tradition of two famous economics, the Russian and Schumpeter, American. And why do we want to use these specific kinds of economics? Is because one, they are not purely quantitative, so we can also take into account the more qualitative values of heritage. They deal with non-linear growth, so they are very dynamic they have very long-term vision, so we are not just dealing with short-term responses from the government. No. We can really think on the long term, and finally, we can involve multiple actors in analyzing the innovation process. What do these economics of change, where can we find them? We can find them in two specific fields. The first one are socio-technical systems theory, which is it's a bit more theoretical, and it deals with the flux of paradigms, as Eduardo Rojas was talking about before. How are we evolving through time? And then the second one is the most important one, and this is evolutionary economics, or Darwinian metaphysics. And we will talk a bit more about this. At the core of evolutionary economics, we find this. It's cognitive routines. So the essence is that we, in society, every day, we have specific ways of dealing with problems. We have procedures, we have rules. And this is what we call the cognitive routine. And then the aim of evolutionary economics, let's say, is trying to analyze knowledge growth mechanisms and to see or to test how innovations are accepted in a market. And how do we do this? How can we see even innovation is accepted in a market? This we do through the methodology of Darwin. The methodology of Darwin is as follows. You have something that exists. You create new ideas, based from these existing ideas, and then you see which one is surviving in the market. So it's called variation, selection, and retention. What is very important here is to know that I put here a picture of Darwin on the Galapagos Island turtles. Darwin was saying that the new ideas, they are based on random. They are random ideas, and then they are naturally selected, the ideas that survive. But we, in economics, we talk about a quasi-evolutionary approach, which says that any new idea will only exist if the society is in need of a new idea. So that is very short how innovation comes about. Now let's see how we can use it to, let's say, analyze existing built heritage practices. Around the late 1990s, there was a group of researchers in the Netherlands who developed this model, which basically takes the different aspects of evolutionary economics and puts it into one analytical model, and this is the one that we use. The model is called a multi-level perspective, and what it does is it analyzes innovations through the interaction of three analytical levels: the landscape, the regime, and niches. The landscape is very easy to understand. It's basically, the landscape moves very slow. It's macroevolutions in terms of economics or in terms of climate change. For instance, if there is an economic distress, you will see a change in the landscape, let's say. The second level is the regime. This is what I've explained before. It is the cognitive routines. It is the way how our society functions today. And there is multiple components that the regime entails, going from demography, economy, politics, culture, etc. And then finally, the interesting one is the niches. The niches are the space, the locations where innovations are made and implemented. How does this work? How is the interaction between the different levels? For instance, at a certain moment, there can be a change in the landscape. As I said before, for instance, climate change is putting pressure on how we live today and how we act today. And this pressure is creating a window of opportunity in the regime. At the same time, we see that some people feel that there is a need for change, so they will create innovations. Once these innovations are, let's say, appreciated by bigger networks, they will come together, and finally they will form one dominant design that you can enter into the existing markets, into the existing society. And this is basically how an innovation comes about. What is important to know is that when this dominant design when innovation enters the regime, it also means that the regime is changed. So the essence is that innovations need to be accepted by the society, which means is that you cannot just have a new idea, as brilliant as it may be, and write something about it and say, poof, I'm an innovator. No, you really have to be able to get it into society to have it work. Okay, how do we use this thing? I put some examples to basically show how you can use this to analyze an innovation. The first one that I selected deals with the transition of sailing ships to steam ships. This is a very far away thing from built heritage, but I think it will help you to understand how you can use the model. What happened is that in the British, that is also in 5 minutes. In the British Empire, the sailing ships were ruling the seas, the big clipper sailing ships. But at a certain point, there were a lot of political revolutions, and let's say the Irish potato famine, and this caused a big trigger for the evolution. Namely, a lot of people wanted to go from the continent, from Europe to America. But the sailing ships were very unreliable and not good in open sea. At the same time, another important trigger, is what you see at number 2, is that the British Empire, they invested in steamships, let's say. Why did they do it? They did it because they wanted to have better communication and mailing within the empire. So they said steamships are better and they're more punctual, so we're going to invest a little bit in this. Because of the investments, there was a dedicated group of innovators around steamships. This gave steamships a lot of benefits. Technical benefits, there was better coal efficiency, but also economic benefits. They invented the iron hull, which basically means that you can have bigger ships and bigger steam engines to make the ships go faster. And then the next important phase in this evolution is the opening of the Suez Canal. What happens there is you have a competition of sailing ships and steamships, but with the opening of the Suez Canal, this gives a lot of opportunity to the steamships. Why? They can have direct trade with India and the rest of Asia, while the sailing ships, they cannot go through the Suez Canal. They are physically not able, so they have to go all the way through Africa. So what happens is that gradually, the steamships, they are being improved, they're becoming better and better, and the sailing ships, they basically disappear. What is important from this story, let's say, is that a factor for innovation is you need to invest in knowledge. You need to create a dedicated community that allows you to make your innovation better and better. Another important lesson from this one is what we call the sailing ship effect. Sometimes you will see that in society there is a general acceptance that something is going really, really bad, that something is going really, really bad, that the politicians or the society does not want to accept this, and they will just keep investing in old methods, and they do not accept innovation, which basically leads to their downfall, which also is true for the sailing ships. Another example that I chose is the transition from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles in America. Basically, around the end of the 19th century, America, the main transport were a car and a horse. But at that time, the American society was changing a lot. There was urbanization, immigration, the hygiene movement, the rise of electricity, and also the middle class was becoming richer. They had more free time, and they had new values, they could go out into the nature, and they could do exciting stuff and have fun. So what happens at that moment is that the horse-drawn carriages, they are forming a problem in the American society. Why? Because of the hygiene movement, the horses, they leave excrements, The urbanization was also a problem. The cities are becoming bigger, and horses are not a good vehicle to go through big cities. And then there was also the rise of electricity, which was offering more and different solutions. Then we have the second step. We see that the society accepts that something needs to change. So there is a lot of innovations going on at that time because everyone wants to get rid of the horses and they want something new. You have, for instance, the electric trams which are invented. You have the safety bike, which is very popular to go outdoors into the nature. And you have different types of cars that are being invented. You have electric cars, which are mostly used as taxis or for luxury services. You have even steam cars, but they were never really a hot topic. And you have gasoline cars. Now, at this moment, all these innovations are coexisting. Many people are investing in these innovations. But at a certain point, one innovation becomes a dominant design, which is the gasoline car. Why? This is the Ford T model of the gasoline car, and this is basically a breakthrough in the innovation. What happens is that the Ford T is a design that competitors can also use. They can be made in mass production, which means that the price can be lowered of manufacturing the cars. And finally, what is important is that there is a very big road lobby who is investing also to make these kind of cars. Finally, the innovation gets accepted in the regime, and the regime changes. For instance, we see shopping malls appearing in the middle of nowhere. We have drive-through fast food chains, we have drive-in movies, so everything is changing to give more space to the car. And then I chose a final example, but I will keep this one short. I think it's an interesting one because it shows a different dynamic. It's basically the introduction of organic food. What does it learn us is that organic food is basically, it became existing, that there was not really pressure to have organic food, but there was a small community of green activists who were shouting and making people aware of the fact that organic food could be a good innovation in our current society. This leads to small market niches of organic food, which are really, really expensive, which is happening here. But then at the same time, we see that the big players in the regime, they say, okay, we see this innovation happening, but we accept it. And now today we can see that organic food can be found for very cheap prices in supermarkets. So here we have an innovation that didn't really change the regime, but that was useful in the end. What I wanted to show with these three examples is that, and there is many innovations that were analyzed in the research, is that every innovation is somehow unique, but they follow the same pattern of the multi-level perspective. And what is important to know is I've been talking about cars, ships, food. These are all very specific innovations, but you can use the model to analyze any technology or service that has a function in society. So that means that you can also use it for built heritage management. And this is what I will show now. So this is a case study that I want to show about how can we use the model for built heritage management. The case study is in Flanders. It's the northern part of Belgium. And I applied the model to understand how preventive conservation is present in the northern region of Belgium, how it is an innovation or it is not an innovation, and how we can make it an innovation. To give you the background details, preventive conservation was, let's say, came into existence in the 1990s in Flanders. And I will show the evolution up until today. What is important to know that we start with a very strong regime that is very reluctant to make any changes, and there is one constant in the evolution, which I show here. The dotted line shows the request of built heritage owners to the government to have a premium to restore their homes. And this is the amount of money that is granted by the government. So we see that there is a big deficiency of money to restore built heritage. Sorry. So this is the starting point. Then I will show the evolution. So we start here in the first part. This is the 1990s. As I said, we see some aspects of preventive conservation coming up. Why? There is pressure from the landscape coming to the regime. There is a general economic demand that is going on, and we have a government who clearly has not enough money to sustain the restoration of built heritage. So what is happening? They see some opportunity in the preventive conservation, maintenance and monitoring. So they say, why not let's install a maintenance premium? This is very good. This is the first step towards preventive conservation. At the same time, we see that some actors, they are really understanding what is happening on an international and European scale. At this time in the 1990s, we see a big need for more community involvement, for creative awareness among people. So they create several organizations that are very much related to this idea. One of them is the Contact Commissie, which is basically a civil society organization which makes the contact between professionals and built heritage owners and the Republican heritage. They also make another organization that is specifically how can we have good craftsmen to make restorations, and they make the famous organization Monumental Watch, something that we have heard before. It's an organization that literally helps building owners with maintaining their homes. They give reports and they create again awareness about maintaining buildings. And then finally, what is really interesting is that due to the social welfare revolution in Belgium, there's also a very big link between what I said before, employing young people who have not enough skills to enter the employment market. Why not employ them and train them in crafts to restore buildings? So all of this is happening here in the 1990s, which is very good. We feel that an innovation is coming about towards a better way of managing our built heritage. But then, there is a problem. We have, around the 2000s, there is the general economic decline, worldwide, globally. And what does this mean is that the government is turning away its face from all these innovative preventive conservation facets, and it's only investing in big restoration, new financial mechanisms that are not as effective. So everything that was happening, which was really going towards a new built heritage management, just fell away. What is interesting is that as a reaction to these government decisions, we have new initiatives, we have new innovations that are arising, but they are not coming from the government, they are coming from really, really low levels. So we have several ones, I will just say so. This is an organization, its name is EGO, and they hire people with no education, and they have a monuments team to restore monuments in a specific area. Then there is a very nice one in the city of Bruges. They employ old immigrant women who have almost no opportunity for work. They will hire them to clean churches. And all of this is happening on a really, really local scale, and often with funds that are not meant for heritage conservation. So this is happening here. A lot of innovations that are not coming from the regime level. So there is a direct need for these innovations. What is interesting that I indicated here in blue is there is one thing that kept existing throughout the entire process, and it is the Monumental Watch organization. They never disappeared, and what you can see is that they create a lot of opportunities to implement innovations. For over 20-30 years now, they have been helping built heritage owners in maintaining their homes and giving the correct information to them and making them aware about maintaining their homes, which has led to a better state of conservation for many built heritage properties in Belgium. but also it has been creating awareness with many players in the field, contractors. All the contractors and architects knows who Monumental Arch is, what they do, and they like to have their help. What is also important is that Monumental Arch, they show the existence of a market of people who want to have maintenance works executed. So based on this, we can see, or we know that this model can be used as an analysis model to implement innovations. We can now try to understand what is the next step that we have to take. Let's also try this model for another project, a project that we have heard about a lot today. It is a maintenance campaign in Sud. I will not go too deep into it, because we already heard in detail what it is about. Sud is in the province of Azuay. After the agricultural revolution in Ecuador, the properties became privately owned. The buildings there were made from adobe in a self-designed, self-built methods, and at a certain point there was the introduction of modern industrial materials, and this has led to the deterioration of both the buildings as well as the tradition of Minga, where people were restoring and maintaining their homes themselves. So because of this, because of an internal pressure, the project, the maintenance campaign in Sud was set up. We have heard what it is about. It started basically with having master students go there, talking to the people, making them aware about heritage values, and making damage assessments of the homes. This has led to the actual project, which has been nicely described by our supervisor in several publications. It was basically making a master plan for about 40 buildings in the areas, how they should be restored. In the beginning, it was fairly difficult to do because there was not a lot of resources or belief in the feasibility, but they kept running the campaign. And finally, by 3 months of preparation and 5 days of execution, we were able to restore about 44 homes in the village of Susudel with the collaboration of the people, stonemasons, the people from the university, and people from the army. So this is what is happening here. We have one front runner, which in this case is the FAO, and they really push the innovation to have the maintenance campaigns running. Afterwards, they turned out to be a big success. Several actions were done after. I believe that the villages, the houses in the villages, they were protected. The INSP, they funded a publication about it. There was money to set up a local laboratory on earthen materials, and the village of Onya also contributed with some resources to dig rooms around. So we could say that overall, the campaign, it was definitely a very, very big success. We see that we started from limited resources, a lot of things were done. It is somewhat an innovation, and a lot of added value was created. So it's definitely a positive, small-scale transition. However, it is not a complete innovation. Why not? I believe that there are 3 main reasons. Correct. You can see that the innovation has never entered the regime because for now they are still very isolated events, campaigns, which is true. So they're not yet changing or entering the regime. On the other hand, the model also has not reached a dominant design. I know that several campaigns have been done, but there is not one way to implement it yet, so it's not a service that is standardized, let's say. We cannot really standardize it, but it's not yet ready to operationalize on a wider scale. Sorry. And there was another, I believe that there is the problem that even if you want to implement a service, there is still a lot of knowledge required from local people how to deal with new management processes or new implementations. You need professionals to guide this process. So it was a success, but not a complete innovation. This is a bad thing. Sorry, no. Definitely definitely not. In my research, I've analyzed several cases similar to the maintenance campaign in Sudan. And there's two big findings. One of them is that there is so many very interesting small-scale transitions going on, but none of them have yet the potential to become an innovation. They're still very, they're not resource efficient, and why? Is because they are still targeted, they're very, I would say, not holistic. They're mostly targeting one aspect of sustainable development, but they're not considering everything as a connected service. For instance, there have been very interesting projects in Italy, but they were very good in quality protection and innovative economic processes, but they have never considered public awareness about the project, and this is true for all the examples that you see. So one thing that you should do is consider everything together as an integrated, holistic, let's say, approach. And then finally, if you can reach this idea, which is, let's say, optimal, and you want to make a real innovation and make it operational in the regime, I can give you some points of attention that you can look into based on the examples that were analyzed here. The first one is scale of operation, like the maintenance campaign in Sudan. It's really good, it's fantastic. You can repeat it in several places, but at a certain moment, you should try to increase the scale to have it actually be implemented in the regime. Another one is knowledge and experience. As I said, it's very good to have innovations, but you also need people who can guide this process and who can implement the process. Another one is continuity and elaboration of networks. I think this is, it is very important. It was also very much present in the campaign in Sudan, where connections were made with the canton of Ornia, etc. But at a certain point, you need to increase the networks that you have to have bigger influence on the regime. And then finally is the specialization and professionalization of the service. If you ever want to have it accepted in society, you should have a product that you can present and implement easily in different cases. One of the ways to make it operational, as we saw before, is to have a continuing monitoring system running throughout. It has several advantages. It will tell you more about the existence of markets, and it will create an awareness among different people. So these are some observations from the built heritage field, but what I find most interesting is that I've analyzed several innovation case studies, and there I found also specific mechanisms that they are using to make innovations that we are not yet really using to the fullest in built heritage. One of them is, I put here the document that we saw before. The importance of it is, it was a research specifically for policymakers. What does it do? It's not a very, let's say, fundamental research, but it is a document that shows to policymakers that there is a need for change. And if you can hand this document very easily to policymakers, for them it's more easier to understand that a change is necessary. At the same time, it's also, I think it's the role of researchers and experts in the field to use their specialist knowledge to criticize the regime. If they see that something is wrong, they should use their knowledge to tell this. Then a third factor that you see returning in many innovation cases is civil society or activists who are creating awareness among people about how things are going wrong, and they are giving opinions to people. Another one, and this is very, very important, in many cases it's very important, once you think you have a good innovation like the maintenance campaigns or monitoring systems, it's very important to attract important players in the regime into your network. And then the final two ones are basically, you need to spread the information that you have as much as possible among people to make them aware of the opportunities that your innovation has. Okay. And that is about everything that I wanted to say.
continuación, la ponencia de evaluación del estado de conservación post-terremoto de las edificaciones patrimoniales en el borde costero de Manuel. Los expositores son Héctor Cedeño, Alberto Paz, Alexis Macías y Alejandro Mendoza.
Buenas noches con todos, con todas. Para nosotros, representando la Universidad Laica de Biofaro de Madrid, es un placer estar aquí compartiendo con ustedes una temática que realmente nos apasiona desde hace mucho tiempo y que la hemos estado practicando e investigando desde hace aproximadamente 10 años. Como pueden ver, el tema nuestro, el patrimonio, es la evaluación del estado de conservación post-terremoto del 16 de abril del 2016 de las edificaciones patrimoniales en el borde costero de Manabí. Al final se darán cuenta que hemos hecho énfasis en una de las ciudades más importantes del país en el tema patrimonial edificado, debido a que la ciudad de Bahía, que está al norte de la provincia, fue declarada patrimonio en el año 2013-2014. Específicamente su centro histórico patrimonial, con casas muy antiguas desde principios del siglo. Como pueden ver, son el tipo de casas que se mantienen en Bahía, especialmente la casa americana, que está en la parte inferior. Como pueden ver, en la parte inferior central está la casa americana, que es un ícono de la ciudad de Bahía y un ícono también por el tipo de construcción de madera. Un ícono debido a que es la representación de la construcción norteamericana en Latinoamérica. Es la única de ese tipo que existe en toda la costa de Sudamérica. Se mantiene en Bahía y, como verán posteriormente, a pesar de todas las restauraciones que ha sufrido, en el tiempo que ha pasado, digo ha sufrido porque realmente una casa patrimonial, al intervenírsela, en algunos casos, se generan cambios o se utilizan materiales que no son los normales que debe tener la casa como fue construida en un principio. Bien, como pueden ver, como antecedentes de lo que hemos estado trabajando en el patrimonio, nos encontramos con el caso de la declaratoria patrimonial de la ciudad de Bahía. El acuerdo ministerial del 2013, número 102 del Ministerio de Cultura y Patrimonio, nos demuestra todo el trabajo que se tuvo que hacer en investigación, en elaboración de fichas, en revisión de casos, inclusive las inspecciones que se realizaron en cada una de las 54 edificaciones patrimoniales que tenía la ciudad de Bahía, prácticamente todas construidas en madera, en caña y en enquinche, hasta llegar a la declaratoria de patrimonio cultural a través del Instituto de Patrimonio como parte del Estado ecuatoriano. El artículo 2 dice: declarar como bien perteneciente al patrimonio cultural del Estado los bienes inmuebles, conjuntos urbanos y espacios públicos detallados en el expediente técnico y en el informe de revisión del expediente para la declaratoria de Bahía de Caracas como patrimonio cultural del Estado ecuatoriano el 4 de abril del 2013. Como les indicaba al principio, básicamente la declaratoria no es sobre todo el cantón, sino sobre el centro histórico. Por eso estamos hablando, ¿sí?, de los espacios públicos y del área urbana incluida. El acuerdo ministerial, en el artículo 3, dice encargar a la Coordinación General Administrativa Financiera la notificación sobre el contenido de la declaratoria de patrimonio, que se hizo pública, se hizo la socialización que normalmente debemos hacer en el país, y se empoderó a la población de su tema de ciudad patrimonial. Vamos a hacer una pequeña reseña de cómo se trabajó para la declaratoria de patrimonio, la actualización del inventario del cantón, con los referidos estudios y las consultorías pertinentes para la declaratoria del patrimonio cultural regional. El problema. Aquí entramos a la parte que indicábamos en nuestra investigación. ¿Qué sucedió luego del terremoto especialmente Bahía? El 4 de agosto del 98